It took us 7 hours to reach the port of Ashdod when we were, after being hijacked and taken by force into Ashdod. When we got there, because I was crew, I was asked to go outside and help tie up the boat. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. I sat on the deck and just couldn't do it. I couldn't, even though for the safety of the boat and the passengers it needed to be done, I just couldn't work with the soldiers on the boat because they'd organised a reception committee for us. Thousands of jeering, screaming soldiers and people in civilian clothes, I don't know who they were, photographing us and filming us against our will. And I realised then that the deck of our boat was, and the ropes and the rails were covered in blood from the women who'd been injured. One so badly in the face, another had been cut when she'd been forced into the broken glass. And I sat down on the deck and I had to let the other members of the crew tie up the boat. I couldn't do it. They dragged us from the boat and we all came off. If we didn't already have bruise marks from defending ourselves from the rubber bullets, we all came off with handshake bruise marks on our arms and on our thighs from where they'd carried us off the boat. And they wouldn't let us put our feet to the ground to walk. They carried us past their photographers and they carried us into their processing area. For some of us, they wouldn't even let us put our feet down there. They held us. They knew who I was. They knew I was on the boat last year, so they were already ready for me. And along with several other passengers, I was forcibly strip searched. Again, when we were processed, we were screamed and jeered at and finally taken to prison. In prison, last year we were sent to a normal prison and we were treated as any other prisoners. This time they opened a special compound for us and we were held incommunicado. We really had no idea what was happening on the outside, whether even any of you were seeing any reports in the press. We knew we had people working hard for us outside, but we didn't know what was happening. In prison, we were denied our basic legal rights under Israeli law. I wasn't allowed my right to a phone call. We were not allowed to be deported within 72 hours, but we were forcibly deported. We didn't have our audience with the judge. Our lawyers weren't allowed to see us individually. We weren't allowed proper access to our consuls. We were treated with contempt. Girls who smoked had their cigarettes taken away in some cases, and the soldiers would then come and blow smoke in their faces just to increase the tension a little bit in there. But I think the thing that upset me most in prison was the treatment of a Turkish woman who'd been on board the Marmara and seen her husband killed. She'd been widowed on the Marmara. And she told us that she was with him when he was shot and that she'd stayed with his body aboard the boat until they dragged her away. After 36 hours they came, and she was just thrown into prison with the rest of us, given no special treatment, no special consideration. After 36 hours they came with a photo of his body that they'd just taken, and told her to identify it before throwing her back to the cells with the rest of us. And she came back and said that he'd been dead for 36 hours when the photo was taken, his face was bloated, he'd been shot in the head. She could only identify him by his mouth. They gave her no special treatment, they just showed her no kindness. They just put her back into prison with everybody else. The Turkish women and the Arabs left voluntarily as soon as possible. They wanted to go home, but some of the foreign activists had decided that we would stay, we would refuse deportation and pursue a legal case, as is our right under their law. On the second day in prison, the third day after they'd taken us, they tricked us. They told us that they were transferring us to a different prison because they had brought real convicts to the prison, and to get us out of the prison, those of us who wanted to stay for our appeal, they brought Israeli convicts, drug addicts and alcohol-dependent convicts, to intimidate us out of there. They of course promised that we were being transferred to immigration detention. After 6 hours in a van, for what should have been a 40-minute journey with no food or water or toilet facilities, we came out to yet another reception of jeering soldiers, this time in an airport cargo hold. They'd lied to us. We were penned in the airport. Humiliation, degradation didn't stop there. Because we were deemed to be resisting, we were penned in and given special treatment. Jeered at, laughed at, pushed. On 2 occasions, soldiers waded into our pen, or a soldier waded into our pen under no provocation and began beating women. began beating the women just by smacking them around the backs of the head, knocked two of them to the ground. Under no provocation, his colleagues did nothing to stop him, rather they held the rest of us back to allow him to carry on. From that position in the pen, we were able to see at a distance the men being processed, the last groups of men being processed. I saw 4 different men being beaten, or rather we saw the beginnings of the beatings, because 2 or 3 soldiers would jump on a man, start to hit him, tackle him to the floor. You would see a dozen leap on top, and then scores more would crowd around, jeering, cheering, waving their arms, shouting and encouraging it, and at the same time soldiers would crowd around us and pen us in, stop us getting anywhere near. One of the men, a London resident, Ken O'Keefe, was beaten so severely that he was unable to get on the flight. And we saw him, you may have seen the YouTube footage, his face was a terrible mess. We really thought he was going to lose his eye. He was covered in cuts and from being kicked in his face. His face was absolutely broken. Bullerudi, Faithful and Ain were also beaten severely. Some people left voluntarily, they wanted to go home. Those of us who refused were subject to more unpleasant treatment. The men who refused to embark the flight were beaten severely. They left the women until last, and they brought us round and we just saw the men who hadn't embarked. When we tried to speak to the men were beaten just for speaking to us. I managed to save 1 possession. We'd had everything taken from us, but for some reason in a lower pocket I had a phone which stayed with me until the prison. Of course it was taken from me there, but it had gone to the prison file, and the prison staff had actually put it on the file with me with my passport to go to the airport. When the senior officer there saw the guy with the 3 stars on his shoulders, saw that I had a phone, took it off the file, smashed it in his hand and binned it in front of me and laughed. And they laughed at us really quite a lot.